6 billion pounds. That is how much coffee grounds the United States alone sends to landfills every single year. Enough to fill a convoy of dump trucks stretching from New York City to Los Angeles, and back again. Most of it disappears into sealed plastic bags, packed beneath layers of household garbage, decomposing in airless darkness, where it does absolutely nothing for anyone. Not for the soil, not for the garden, not for the earth it was taken from in the first place. Meanwhile, right outside the kitchen door, garden soil sits compacted, depleted, and quietly starving for exactly the kind of nutrition those discarded grounds could deliver. Here is what almost nobody talks about. When used coffee grounds make contact with living garden soil, they trigger a chain reaction so powerful that within 30 days, the ground underneath undergoes a measurable biological transformation. The bacteria shift. The physical structure changes. Earthworms migrate in from across the yard, and the garden above starts producing results that no bag of store-bought fertilizer has ever been able to match. This is not a recycling tip. This is not a feel-good kitchen hack. This is a 30-day biological event, and it comes with a twist that most gardeners, even experienced ones with decades of dirt under their fingernails, never see coming. The great acidity myth, and why experienced gardeners still get it wrong. Ask any seasoned gardener about using coffee grounds in the garden, and the answer comes back almost instantly. They are highly acidic, so only use them around acid-loving plants like hydrangeas, azaleas, and blueberries. This piece of advice has been handed down over backyard fences, whispered across nursery counters, and repeated in gardening columns and magazines for the better part of half a century. It sounds perfectly reasonable, completely logical. After all, coffee itself is acidic. Plenty of people over 50 have had to switch to gentler, low-acid roasts just to keep their stomachs settled in the morning. So the grounds left behind must be concentrated little packets of acid, right? The assumption sounds airtight, and it is dead wrong. Here is the science that changes everything. The acid compounds present in coffee beans are highly water-soluble. When hot water flows through those grounds during the brewing process, it pulls nearly all of the acidic content out of the grounds and carries it into the cup. The liquid coffee sitting in the mug is acidic, absolutely. But the spent grounds left behind in the filter? When tested with a standard soil pH meter, they register a reading of roughly 6.5 to 6.8. For context, a pH of 7.0 is considered perfectly neutral, neither acidic nor alkaline. That means used coffee grounds sit so close to the neutral mark that the difference is practically meaningless in any real garden setting. They will not burn acid-sensitive perennials. They will not dramatically shift the chemistry of a raised bed or a container planter. They will not magically transform hydrangea blooms from pink to blue, no matter how many scoops get mixed into the soil around them. The living soil itself functions as a powerful natural buffer system, constantly self-adjusting to resist sudden chemical changes and to maintain a stable, hospitable environment for its vast community of organisms. So the single most widely repeated piece of coffee ground advice in the entire gardening world, the one that has been trusted and passed along for generations, turns out to be built on a fundamental misunderstanding. And that misunderstanding has kept millions of home gardeners from ever using a free, effective, and genuinely powerful soil amendment that was sitting on their kitchen counter every single morning, waiting to be put to work. But here is the thing. Correcting the acidity myth is just the opening scene of a much bigger story. The real drama begins the moment those grounds make contact with dirt, and the first 7 days underground are nothing short of a biological war zone. The 30-day underground drama, a timeline nobody warned you about. Picture this. A handful of dark, damp coffee grounds get scattered across the surface of a garden bed and raked lightly into the top inch of earth. To the human eye, nothing happens. The garden looks exactly the same, the soil feels exactly the same. But down below the surface, invisible, silent, and already accelerating, a countdown has begun. And the events that unfold over the next 30 days will permanently alter the composition and structure of that ground. Used coffee grounds are not empty waste. They are a genuine nutritional payload. Laboratory analysis consistently puts their nitrogen content at roughly 2% by weight, comparable to many commercial animal manures, along with meaningful traces of phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and copper. But unlike the synthetic fertilizers sold in bright plastic jugs at the hardware store, the ones that slam plants with a massive artificial chemical spike, then wash into streams and groundwater within days, coffee grounds deliver their nutrients slowly, steadily, and entirely organically. The soil gets fed over time. The waterways stay clean. Day 1 through day 7 is the invasion phase. Coffee grounds arrive carrying a carbon-to-nitrogen ratio hovering around 20:1, a proportion that microbiologists consider nearly ideal for rapid microbial colonization. Within hours of making contact with moist soil, billions of bacteria and fungi detect the new food source and begin multiplying at a staggering, almost explosive rate. Every square centimeter of ground surrounding the coffee particles becomes a dense feeding zone of furious biological activity. But here is where the story takes its darkest turn, the plot twist that catches even veteran gardeners completely off guard. To break down the complex proteins and organic compounds locked inside coffee grounds, those rapidly multiplying microbes need extra energy, and they take it by force. They pull available nitrogen straight out of the surrounding soil to fuel their own digestive process. In the world of soil science, this phenomenon has a name: nitrogen immobilization. And for the gardener who does not understand it, the visible results look like pure disaster. Between day 7 and day 21, the nitrogen robbery reaches its peak. Plants growing directly above the underground heist may start to show distress signals. Older leaves develop a faint yellowish tinge as the plant reallocates its shrinking nitrogen reserves. Overall growth slows. The garden looks tired, washed out, even sickly. A gardener who does not know what is happening beneath the surface could easily panic, blame the coffee grounds, rip them out of the bed, and swear off the entire practice for good. That would be the worst possible decision, because the payoff is just days away. By day 25 to 30, the climax of this underground saga arrives. The enormous microbial population that gorged itself on the coffee grounds reaches its natural peak, and then crashes. Billions of microscopic organisms die off and begin to decompose. As their cells break apart, they release all that hoarded nitrogen back into the soil. But here is the critical detail. The nitrogen returns in a different form. It has been converted into inorganic molecules, ammonium and nitrate, which happen to be the exact chemical forms that plant roots absorb with the greatest efficiency. The temporary robbery does not just end. It ends with a deposit significantly larger than the original balance, and simultaneously, something even more remarkable happens to the physical texture of the soil itself. Throughout the entire feeding frenzy, those billions of active microbes secrete sticky biological compounds known to scientists as extracellular polymeric substances. Think of them as microscopic glue, natural adhesives produced as a byproduct of microbial digestion. These compounds bind loose, powdery, disconnected soil particles into stable clumps called water-stable aggregates. Hard, compacted, seemingly lifeless dirt begins to soften and breathe. The texture gradually shifts towards something dark, spongy, and beautifully crumbly. The kind of soil that holds on to precious moisture through a brutal July heat wave, yet drains cleanly and quickly when a heavy summer thunderstorm rolls through. The entire transformation takes roughly 30 days from start to finish. The soil that emerges from this process is structurally, chemically, and biologically different from the soil that went in. and all it cost was a handful of grounds from the morning coffee pot. But while bacteria have been waging their nitrogen war near the surface, another quieter migration has been underway for days. Something has been traveling through the dirt from every corner of the yard, drawn by the unmistakable presence of coffee. The earthworm effect. Nature's underground engineers arrive. If there is one single creature that separates tired, compacted, lifeless dirt from the kind of rich, dark, productive garden soil that makes neighbors stop and ask questions over the fence, it is the earthworm. And very few substances on the face of the planet attract earthworms with the same speed and intensity as used coffee grounds. Night crawlers, red wigglers, common garden worms of every variety. They all respond to the presence of coffee grounds in the soil with remarkable urgency and purpose. But the reason is not what most people assume. It has nothing to do with caffeine, nothing to do with any chemical stimulant or aromatic attraction. The answer is purely mechanical. Earthworms have no teeth. To process the organic matter they consume, they rely entirely on a powerful muscular organ called a gizzard, the same type of internal grinding chamber that birds use to crush seeds. The gizzard needs a steady supply of tiny, rough, abrasive particles to function properly, grit that can physically grind organic material down into a digestible paste. The fine, slightly coarse texture of spent coffee grounds provides exactly that mechanical aid. For an earthworm, coffee grounds are not food in the traditional sense. They are the perfect digestive tool. Within days of grounds entering garden soil, earthworm activity in the treated area measurably increases. They travel surprising distances through the earth, navigating toward the material with a biological efficiency that researchers are still working to fully understand. As they feed and burrow, they pull coffee grounds deep underground, creating an expanding network of narrow tunnels that serve as highways for oxygen and rainwater. Channels that carry both vital resources far below the surface, reaching root zones that compacted soil had been slowly choking off for years or even decades. What earthworms leave behind in their wake is arguably more valuable than anything they consume. When coffee grounds pass through an earthworm's full digestive tract, the material mixes with the creature's own natural enzymes and internally absorbed minerals. The resulting waste product, known as worm castings, is one of the most nutrient-dense natural soil amendments in existence. And laboratory analysis has uncovered a surprising chemical detail. Worm castings produced from a diet heavily supplemented with coffee grounds register an alkaline pH ranging from 8.5 to 9.0. That alkaline reading naturally counterbalances any trace of residual acidity that may have lingered in the original grounds. Through digestion alone, the earthworm neutralizes the chemistry, so the system builds on itself in layers. The coffee grounds feed the bacteria and fungi. The microbes restructure the soil's physical texture. The earthworms aerate the ground, fertilize it with their castings, and rebalance its pH toward a healthy range. Each organism plays a specific, irreplaceable role in a layered biological process that no synthetic product on a garden center shelf has ever been able to duplicate. Everything described so far has been encouraging, a story of quiet, powerful transformation. But the next chapter of this story carries a serious warning, and ignoring it can cause real, visible damage to a garden. The dark side of the roast, a warning every gardener needs to hear. The internet is overflowing with cheerful blog posts, Pinterest infographics, and enthusiastic videos encouraging gardeners to scatter unlimited coffee grounds across every flower bed, vegetable row, and container planter in sight. Very few of those sources pause to mention what can happen when coffee grounds are applied carelessly, excessively, or in the wrong location. And what happens is not minor. It can be genuinely destructive. Coffee trees did not develop caffeine as a favor to sleepy humans. They engineered it, over millions of years of patient, relentless evolution, as a sophisticated chemical weapon designed to eliminate competition. In botanical science, caffeine belongs to a category of compounds called allelopathic substances. An allelopathic compound is one that a plant produces specifically to poison the soil in its immediate vicinity, suppressing seed germination and stunting root development of any competing species that attempts to grow nearby. In the wild, this invisible chemical warfare gives the coffee tree a decisive territorial advantage. In a home garden, applied without understanding, it becomes a genuine threat. Even after a full brewing cycle, a meaningful concentration of caffeine remains embedded in used coffee grounds. The exact amount varies depending on the brewing method. Espresso grounds tend to retain significantly more caffeine than standard drip filter grounds. But the compound is present, and it is still biologically active. If fresh, uncomposted coffee grounds are spread directly over newly sown vegetable seeds or heaped around the base of young, recently transplanted seedlings, the caffeine goes straight to work against them. Published research has documented that caffeine interferes with cellular division in developing root tips, the exact tissue responsible for a young plant's ability to anchor itself in the soil and absorb water and nutrients. The result is stunted, weakened, and in some vulnerable species, outright fatal growth. Clover and alfalfa seeds are among the most sensitive. Young tomato transplants and broccoli seedlings suffer measurable setbacks. Even common garden flowers can struggle when exposed to concentrated doses of fresh, uncomposted grounds. And there is a second danger lurking in the physical properties of coffee grounds that receives even less public attention. The phenomenon gardeners have started calling the crust of death. Coffee grounds are extraordinarily fine in particle size, far finer than most gardeners realize. When applied in a thick layer, anything more than roughly half an inch deep, and left exposed to sun and air on the soil surface without being mixed in or covered, they dry out rapidly and bond together into a dense, almost cement-like mat. This dried crust is hydrophobic, a scientific term meaning the surface actively repels water rather than absorbing it. When rain falls on this sealed layer, or when a gardener stands overhead patiently watering with a hose or a watering can, the water simply beads up and slides off the surface without penetrating. Not a single drop reaches the soil below. Beneath this invisible barrier, plant roots slowly suffocate, dehydrate, and die of thirst, all while the gardener above believes the bed is being properly watered. The danger is real, documented, and entirely avoidable, because the solution is straightforward. The 3 golden rules of application. How to use coffee grounds without risk. Decades of composting fieldwork, agricultural extension research, and controlled scientific study have narrowed the safest and most effective coffee ground practices down to 3 proven methods. Each one eliminates the caffeine threat, prevents crust formation, and delivers the full benefit of the 30-day soil transformation with no collateral damage. The Compost Cure. This is the safest method available, and it consistently produces the most powerful long-term results. The process is refreshingly simple. Take each day's used coffee grounds, paper filter included, since the filter is pure cellulose carbon and breaks down beautifully in any pile, and add them to a working compost bin or tumbler. The single most important rule is ratio. Coffee grounds should never make up more than 20% of the total compost volume. Treat them as a green, nitrogen-rich input, and balance them generously with brown, carbon-rich materials, dried autumn leaves, shredded newspaper, torn cardboard, or straw. Inside the pile, the combination of sustained internal heat and intensely diverse microbial activity works together to completely degrade and destroy the residual caffeine over a period of weeks to months. The finished product is a dark, crumbly, nutrient-packed compost amendment that can be spread freely across any garden bed: flowers, vegetables, herbs, ornamentals, without a trace of risk to seeds, seedlings, or established plants. The scratch and shield. For gardeners who do not maintain a compost pile or tumbler, direct soil application is absolutely viable, but it demands care, restraint, and one critical extra step. Begin by sprinkling a thin, even layer of used coffee grounds across the soil surface. The layer should be no thicker than 1/4 of an inch, roughly the thickness of 2 stacked coins. Keep the grounds well clear of the stems and root zones of seedlings, young transplants, and anything that has been in the ground for less than a month. Next, take a small hand rake or cultivator and lightly scratch the grounds into the top inch of existing soil, blending them into the earth rather than leaving them sitting on top. Finally, and this step is non-negotiable, cover the entire treated area with a generous layer of coarse organic mulch. Arborist wood chips, straw, or shredded hardwood bark all work beautifully. This coarse protective blanket accomplishes 3 things at once. It prevents the fine coffee particles from drying into a hydrophobic crust. It holds moisture in the soil below, and it creates the dark, cool, sheltered conditions that earthworms need to safely rise to the surface and begin feeding. The garden tea. When established, heavy-feeding plants need a quick nutritional boost mid-season. Mature tomato vines sagging under the weight of ripening fruit, pepper plants pushing out their second or third flush of blooms, squash runners sprawling aggressively across the bed. A simple liquid extraction delivers visible results within days. Place 2 cups of used coffee grounds into a standard 5-gallon bucket of water. Set the bucket outdoors in a shaded spot and let it steep overnight. By morning, the water will have turned a deep, rich amber color as soluble nitrogen, potassium, and trace minerals leach steadily out of the grounds. Strain the liquid or simply pour it carefully, directing the flow around the base of each plant and keeping it off the foliage. And here is one final discovery that surprised even experienced horticultural researchers. A very diluted coffee solution, roughly 1 to 2% concentration, essentially the weakest possible brew, is highly toxic to slugs and snails. Pouring a thin coffee drench across the soil surface and around the base of hostas, lettuces, strawberries, and other slug-vulnerable plants either drives the pests into full retreat or kills them outright through caffeine poisoning of their nervous systems. It remains one of the very few genuinely effective, entirely chemical-free slug deterrents that is held up under repeated, peer-reviewed scientific testing. 1 bucket of used grounds, 2 powerful uses, 0 synthetic chemicals involved. 3 methods, 3 levels of effort and commitment. Each one reliably converts what the kitchen throws away into something the garden desperately needs. The only requirements are a little patience and a light, measured hand. The quiet transformation. Every morning, in kitchens across the country, a small paper filter full of dark, damp grounds gets scraped into the trash can without a second thought. It weighs almost nothing. It looks like waste. Nobody pauses to consider what it might become if given the chance. But 30 days in living soil tells a completely different story. The bacteria awaken. The nitrogen cycles through robbery and generous return. The physical structure of the earth softens, loosens, and rebuilds itself. The earthworms arrive, tunnel deep, feed steadily, and leave behind castings richer than anything money can buy at a garden center. And the garden above, quietly, without spectacle, without a single announcement, begins to change in ways that only become truly visible over the arc of a full growing season. Not every transformation is loud. Some of the most powerful ones happen underground, in total silence, measured not in hours or days but in patient, unhurried seasons. A handful of coffee grounds scattered across the soil today becomes richer earth in 30 days, stronger root systems by midsummer, and a healthier, heavier, more abundant harvest by the time the first cool breeze of autumn arrives. That filter sitting beside the coffee maker right now is not empty. It is full of potential. 30 days of quiet biological power, waiting for nothing more than a handful of garden soil to set it free. Do not throw it away.